Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our program this morning. We have Bob Barr with us. He has worn many hats in his lifetime and still does. He is a retired social worker, among many other things that he might tell you a little bit more about. And he is going to be discussing life after retirement. Thank you so much, Bob, for providing this program for us, and I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Yes, I am a licensed social worker. I'm also an ordained pastor, and I've served churches and also worked in the aging network. I've worked both at the county level and at the area agency level. So I've had plenty of experience in working with seniors. I've also, since I've retired, I've also been working, helping pastors and social workers to develop new programs. So one of the big programs that we're working on is helping churches to develop senior programs. A lot of them don't have any real programs to minister to seniors, and yet they're becoming a larger part of our community and also a larger part of our churches. So if your church is interested in having one or has a senior program, feel free to let me know. Thank you. We live in an age of change. A lot has changed. I remember the excitement when my parents first got a TV set, and now we've got all kinds of electronic gadgets. Just the fact that we're sitting here and I'm talking to you is unusual. It was not even thought of when I was a kid. At one time, when you retired, you were finished. Most people continued working until they were no longer able to work. And then when they were no longer able to work, they either went to live with their family or to a retirement home or to a nursing home. And oftentimes they died fairly soon afterwards. Nowadays, many people retire early because of Social Security or because of union or company rules. They'll retire between the ages of 62 or 65. And then with people living longer, people have a long stretch of period of retirement. And it's a new thing that people have to deal with. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't prepare for it. A lot of people think to prepare financially for it, but don't think that they or don't prepare for them personally. And yet there's a lot of big changes. I often kid people who are about to retire and say, you need to find something important to do to keep yourself busy, or you'll die fairly soon after retirement. Either you'll die of boredom or your wife will kill you because you're always underfoot. I say that jokingly, and yet at the same time, many people die soon after the retirement, mainly because of the fact that they're not doing anything. They're just sitting around. They may get depression and may commit suicide, or they may just simply get blood clots and die of heart attacks or strokes. Retirement is really what you make it. My in-laws, my mother's or my wife's parents, when they retired, they both worked, and then they just went home and they just sat around doing nothing. They kind of puttered around the house, but they didn't have anything really to do. My father-in-law died in his 70s, and my mother-in-law had a stroke shortly afterwards. The stroke was actually fortunate for her because when she had the stroke, she went into a nursing home. Suddenly she was surrounded by people and she had lots of things to do. And so she perked right up and eventually lived 10 more years, and she died in her 80s. My parents were the exact opposite. Although they retired in theory, they didn't really stop. My dad and mother had a full-blown business. They volunteered for the Red Cross, and they helped out with a historical village nearby. And so by the time they were in their 80s, they were both very active. Unfortunately, when in their early 80s, two men broke into their house and beat them unconscious and left them homebound. They deteriorated very rapidly after that, both mentally and physically. They still died in about 10 years and died in their early 90s. But I'm sure they would have lived a lot longer and a lot happier and active life had they not been assaulted by the robbers. So life can be a lot different depending on what you make it. It's important to keep your mind and body active. If your mind doesn't have anything to do, it tends to get lazy. Although Alzheimer's affects people on all spectrum, if your mind is not active, it's much more likely that you're to catch dementia or Alzheimer's. And if you just sit around and do nothing, it's much more likely that you're going to get blood clots or just simply get weak and no longer able to function. So the more you can keep active, the better off you are. A lot of people aren't prepared for how much their finances drop. You make a lot less on Social Security than you do on employment. A lot of people are fortunate to have retirement, but not everybody. So it's important to look forward to that. A lot of times your friends change. You think, well, you know, they're my friends, we'll just keep continuing what they're doing. My in-laws, when they stopped working, it's like everybody forgot them. Nobody called, nobody visited. My parents had a lot of people around them. When they had their 50th anniversary, they had over 100 people. Yet after they were assaulted and they became homebound, it's like everybody went on with their life, but they forgot them. So you need to make sure that you work at developing new friends who have your interests and who are able to continue on through life. Retirement is also a time when you begin to look at what's really important in life. Before, your job and your family were probably important, but once you retire, it's important to find something that really gives you a reason for being here. Many times you'll ask, you know, why am I here? Society says, well, you know, you're not needed anymore. You're really not needed. But even though you may be homebound, there still may be something that you can do. Call friends and cheer them up. Just check on, make sure that they're still living, or if they're in need of anything. It's also a time when you begin to think of what happens when I die. You know, it's easy when you're young to think about, well, I don't think about dying. It's a long ways away. That's for old people. But when you get old and your parents start to die, and maybe your brothers and sisters start to die, and your friends who are your age, you begin to ask yourself, what happens when I die? So it's important to begin thinking about these questions. A lot of people think that when you retire, that's kind of the end of it. It's just kind of everything will go on. But actually there are 4 stages of retirement. The first of all, we like to call the snowbirds, because a lot of them, when they're healthy, a lot of them in the north will take off and fly south for the winter. So we like to think of them as snowbirds. They're usually healthy and active. If you don't have to worry about money, you can take off and travel. You can go visit family. Do a lot of the things you always wanted to do. Unfortunately, a lot of people are not able to do that or just simply choose not to. There's always lots of things that you can do to volunteer. The senior center or community centers or your church or senior center oftentimes have things that they can do. When I was the head of the social service office for the Salvation Army here in Bowling Green, I had lots of volunteers, people that helped. We didn't have funds to hire a lot of people, and so we depended on a lot of volunteers. You may have a hobby that you could expand. You might like to paint, or you might like to write poetry or do other writing. You might like to do arts and crafts. You can expand those to take up your time, and you might even find a place that you can sell them to help bring in a little extra cash. Unfortunately, some people need to continue working, and they're healthy and may choose to work. It's always nice if you can stay on with the job you had until you are no longer able to do it. But unfortunately, some people have company or union rules that require you to. And so you may have to look elsewhere. There may be other companies that don't have retirement requirements, and you can find a job with them. You also might, within your company, might be able to find a place where you can transfer jobs. My dad worked in the factory. He hated his job. And so he decided to take up a little hobby of printing. And when a job came open in the company he worked for that they needed a printer, he was the only one in the company who knew how to run a press. And so he was able to transfer into the print shop. And so his hobby became a full-time job. Some people may do it just because they like to, but you can also do it if you can no longer do your job, and you can always transfer to another place in the company where you can continue working. If you have a forced retirement in your company, you may find another company that may be able to take you on where you can use your talents. It may be that either your career is ending, or it may be that you're no longer able to work in your career. You might find another career that you can do. I had a friend in college whose father had a hardware store. He always felt he wanted to be a minister, but with his hardware store, he never had time. Once he decided to retire and close the hardware store, he thought, now's a good time to become a minister. And so he went back and got his credentials and became a minister. You may also be able to hire on with somebody part-time. You may not want to work full-time, or you may not be able to work full-time. There are lots of smaller companies who may not need somebody full-time, but they could take on somebody part-time. A lot of companies are also finding that older people are more dependable than younger people. And so I've gone into some McDonald's and found everybody there had gray hair, because the owner found out that they're more reliable and has chosen to hire more people. If you got a skill that you find is in great demand, you may be able to do contract work. My grandfather was an engineer for Buick Motor Division. They had a requirement that he had to retire, but he had a skill that was much in demand. There are a lot of smaller companies that could use an engineer now and then, but they aren't able to hire somebody full-time. And so he began to contract with a lot of agencies to begin doing work from part-time. It may be you be able to work for the company you used to work for if you were a valued employee. My dad worked in the print shop with the company he worked for. When he retired, there was nobody to take over the print shop, and so he purchased all their equipment, set up a print shop in his basement, and they contracted all their work out to him. So there may be that possibility. You might be able to expand your hobby into a business. If you paint, you might be able to get to where you can sell them. If you do arts and crafts, you may be able to sell them. When the company my dad worked for, he was doing contract work after he retired, they closed. He made contracts with other companies. And eventually he turned it into a full-time business. A lot of times you think of people as being, who teach as being people with high degrees, like you have to have a PhD. While I was working with the area agency, with the area agency on aging in Mansfield, I felt that I'd like to do a little something on the side. And so I went to the local community college and I said, what would it take for me to add to my degree to where I could teach in college? And he said, what are you doing weekends? I said, nothing. He said, how would you like to teach? We have a class that the teacher left and I need somebody. I just had a master's degree and I found out that, you know, when they're desperate, they do bend the rules a little bit. I ended up teaching for 6 years at Owens Community College, teaching sociology. So there's that possibility. A lot of the schools are in need of substitute teachers and community aides. And a lot of retired people can work those either part-time or full-time. You may find a need to teach at community centers or senior centers if you do arts and crafts, or if you like to write. You may find that they may have classes. You might find, if you, for instance, you like to do arts and crafts, you might find a craft store that needs somebody, or that would like somebody to teach arts and crafts, because the more people that do arts and crafts, the more business. And so they may have classes there in their business to stimulate business. So there are lots of possibilities. However, all good things sometimes come to an end, and the good times don't always last. You need to begin to preparing for the next step. There may be a time that you're not able to be as active, you're not able to do as much work. And so you may have to think about a more restricted lifestyle. One of the things we oftentimes don't think about is housing. My wife and I bought a house trailer 20 years ago. I was a little ways from retirement yet, but I said to myself, I had polio when I was young and I have weak legs. You know, one of these days I'm going to be in a wheelchair. So when we had our trailer manufactured, we specified that the hallways and doorways had to be wheelchair accessible. Fortunately, I still am not in a wheelchair. I've still kept active, and so I don't need it. But when the time comes that I need a wheelchair, our house is equipped for it. The best thing is when you can get it built, to have it built to your specifications, because it's a lot easier to do that when it's building than to try and remodel an older house. But if you're renting, you can always move to a place that's more friendly to handicapped accessible. But if you're buying, it's good to look at that when you begin downsizing at retirement. Another thing you need to look at is financial transfers. Have somebody check your finances. You never know what's going to happen. My father-in-law died suddenly. My mother-in-law woke up one morning and he was dead. Unfortunately, he handled all the finances. So when we were getting ready for the funeral, I was going over the finances to try and figure out what had to be paid and when. While we were talking to the funeral director, she said, "How are we going to pay for this?" I handed her the checkbook and said, "Write him a check." They had been putting their retirement on their checkbook and wrote off expenses, and the rest had just continued to build up. They'd built up $81,000 on their checkbook. That could have been in another account making money, but it was still on the checkbook. So when it came to the funeral expenses, it was just a matter of writing the check. She had no idea what the expenses were. And so my wife got on a checking account with her so that my wife could help write the checks. It's fortunately we did, because she had a stroke a month later. And so my wife was able to take over the finances. Once you get into stage 2, you're going to find that there are certain things that are difficult, like home maintenance, yard maintenance. If you have family nearby, they can help you. But a lot of families are busy, or they are living a long ways away and are not able to help. Neighbors used to be a good source of help, but unfortunately today, many of them are not. You may be able to find neighbor kids who are looking for a little extra money. They may be able to help you. I need help with mowing my lawn, and I have a very hard time getting somebody to mow the lawn. I get somebody for a while and they'll either move away or they'll move on to other pursuits. So I'm continually searching for somebody to mow lawns. Transportation may be a problem. It may be that the husband was the one who drives, and if he dies or becomes disabled, then the wife oftentimes has problems. That was the problem with my in-laws. My dad did all the drive, my father-in-law did all the driving. And so she had a problem because we lived 180 miles away and my wife was an only child. The senior center oftentimes offers that, but in rural areas that may not be easily accessible. It may be that you can find a young mother someplace who hates going to the grocery store because she has little kids that she's always tagging after her. She might let you watch the kids so she can do the shopping and do your shopping for you. Or she can let you ride along and you can shop while she's shopping. Meals are always the problem. A lot of women just don't feel there's any reason cooking because they don't have any family to cook for. And so they don't cook properly. Men may not have been used to fixing their meals and may not be able to fix very much in the way of, it's macaroni and cheese or something to throw into the microwave. It might be you've got family or friends who could fix enough for a couple of days and you could put them in the freezer and take them out in the microwave. The senior center has home delivered meals, which are available in a lot of areas, not every area, but in most areas. So it's things that you can think about. You also need to begin to think about stage 3. Stage 3 is where you may become disabled or your spouse may become disabled or die. And so your situation changes drastically. It's good to have advanced directives, power of attorney for medical and financial. When you're not able to make decisions for yourself, it helps to give your family ideas of what you want treated. Do you want to be resuscitated or don't you want to be resuscitated? These are questions you need to think about and begin to ask yourself, and make sure you put it in writing, because you may tell somebody, but they may forget. And just a verbal telling them is not legally binding. So you want to make sure it's in writing. The Senior Center can help you with that too. You also need to think about the possibility of Medicaid. We don't think that we want to get into that, but eventually the funds run out and you may need to. You need to prepare ahead of time, because they'll look back and say, for 2 or 3 years, and say, did you do this medical or this financial transaction to be able to make sure you're eligible for Medicaid? And they may bar you from Medicaid for a while. So you want to make sure that you're getting those things taken care of. You want to think about funeral arrangements. If you haven't made those, once you go on Medicaid, there's going to be no money to do that. If you make those arrangements ahead of time and make them irrevocable, then they won't count towards your Medicaid. So it's important to make those decisions ahead of time. Again, transportation may be a problem if you're no longer able to drive, or your spouse was the one that was doing the driving. So you need to look at the transportation as well. It may mean that you may have to move into a city or some place where transportation is available. You're also going to have to worry about taking care of yourself or taking care of your spouse. If there's 2 people together, one spouse may take care of the other, but that becomes a heavy burden, especially if that person doesn't have the strength to lift you in and out of a wheelchair or in and out of bed. You may need to get somebody to help you. Or you just may need somebody to watch the disabled spouse while the other one goes to the grocery store or has a little time to themselves. So you might look at respite care. There are agencies that do provide somebody who comes in for a couple hours or maybe on an ongoing basis. You also may want to look at assistance. A lot of times assistance is expensive, but there are organizations like the Area Agency on Aging that have Passport, which can provide care under Medicaid. It may be that you get to where you're no longer able to stay in your own home, but you're not quite ready for a nursing home. They do have assisted living, which is kind of an in-between, where you have people available there to care for you, but it's like your own apartment, where you stay in your own apartment and they provide services. One of the big problems that many people have is when their parents are disabled and they live a long distance away, they aren't able to oversee their care. There are some companies now that are starting to provide services where that if you work for the company and your parents need care, their parents need care, then the company will arrange with somebody in the area where your parents live to arrange services. It's relatively new, but it's spreading to more and more companies. It's not available for everybody, but it helps people who have to care for their parents and it's at a distance. One of the problems with home care is the fact that when you're in a nursing home, you have people around. When you're at home, you may have somebody come in an hour or 2 a day, but you have a long part of the day in which you have nothing to do. So it's good to find something to do. And it's also good to reach out to other people. They themselves may be sitting at home for a long period of time. And so you can call and chat with them. How are you doing? it's also good to check on them. You could set up where you call them in the morning, and if they answer, then you can talk. And if they don't answer, then you can call somebody to check on them. And if they're waiting for your call and you don't call, then they can call and have somebody check on you. So it works both ways. And it's good to have somebody call in the morning and in the evening. In the morning to make sure you got up all right, in the evening to make sure that you're still getting around and able to get to bed all right. So it's a big help. It's good to look at security as well. Now, we don't like to think of the people that come to help you as being dishonest. Most of them are honest, but occasionally one may not be. My parents found out the hard way. They had somebody coming in and they would sit in the living room while she went and cleaned the bedroom. And while she was cleaning, she would occasionally take checks out of their checkbook, make the checks out to herself and cash them. Fortunately, my brother was overseeing and balancing the checkbook and noticed the checks, and they were able to catch her. It's very rare, but it does happen, and it's good to make sure that your financial things are locked away where the people who come in are not able to get them. Eventually the time will come, you may need to go into a nursing home, and so it's good to be prepared. I knew what was coming ahead of time, and so I was able to arrange my mother-in-law's finances so that when it came time for her to go on Medicaid, she was able to go right into it. There was no problems. My parents was a different matter. My brother handled the finances, and I kept after him. I said, you need to get ready. He said, oh, I'll do it eventually. And then the time came when they had to go into the nursing home. And so he had to play catch up. And so there was several months delay in trying to get Medicaid after they ran out of funds. And so it caused problems for a little while, but he eventually got it straightened out. But it's always good to be prepared ahead of time. That's all I have. Is there anything else any questions that you might have?